Hey, everybody, welcome back to Practical Liberty. My name's Henry Bingaman. Uh, Today's guest I met at a private club in South Florida 5 or 6 years ago at this point. Now, this is the kind of private club. It's owned by somebody that's almost a billionaire. The walls in this place are covered in $100,000 paintings. The bar literally only has a top shelf, and like multi-million dollar business deals get done here with just a handshake. I got invited because I happen to have made this person a lot of money with my marketing over the years. So the room's filled with a bunch of founders of 7, 8, 9 figure businesses, some authors, and just an assortment of really interesting people. And we decided at one point to play a poker game. And somehow a poker table like magically appears out of the side and somebody decides to deal. So now a lot of these people at the table were just very interesting, but there's one person that like was head and shoulders more interesting than everyone else. He's telling stories about sailing through a hurricane in the Bahamas. He spent some time living in Cuba, running from government agents. He was mistaken for a CIA agent by some cops in Panama. Just like every story was more and more crazy than the next. But what I really ended up liking about him was that he's not the type of person that just takes life as it comes. He's really intentionally designed his own life to maximize for freedom, to maximize for travel, and all the things that he really cares about. And I think as a liberty-loving audience, that's something we don't think enough about. We let too much of our life just happen to us, and we don't intentionally design it to fulfill our needs. And so I wanted to bring Tane on again. He's been here. He was here last about May of 2023, but we have a lot more updates to share. So, Tane, thanks for coming back on, man.
Thanks, Henry, for that great introduction. Yeah, that poker game was a real rogues gallery and a real who's who of some of the online business and marketing world that you and I are part of. And I always enjoy my time when I'm down there. Boy, you get a chance to learn from some real movers and shakers. But these are also some of the people that I admired. And when I set out to create my lifestyle, which I know we're going to get into here, these are some of the people that I learned from as well. So we're going to share some of the strategies and tactics that really worked for them. A lot of them are quite a bit older than you and me. So thank you again for having me on. I'm looking forward to getting into it.
I mean, it's obviously my pleasure. We've been working a lot closer together. As a lot of people know, I'm making a big push this year towards getting a second residency, getting just a foothold outside the United States, to kind of just secure my freedom. It's something that a concept that you taught me is sovereign risk, where if one government has total authority over you and all your assets, you're at much higher risk than if you diversify kind of the authority structures you're under. So that can be, get some of your finances outside the U.S., get a second residency, so there's always a place that'll let you in if for something, some reason the United States doesn't become a friendly place to live anymore. And so you've done this. You have residencies all over the world. Can you kind of talk about some of the way you've set up your life? Just give people kind of a big picture of your, I guess, living situation.
Yeah, yes. Look, I understood by instinct, by genetic disposition, right? Many years ago. I'm in my 50s now, and I truly understood this probably in my teens and even earlier, that there was gonna be a big reckoning in my lifetime. Now, don't ask me how. It had to be clues that I picked up. I grew up in a military family, so we spent lots and lots of dinner time discussions trying to solve the world's problems. Maybe that had something to do with my young, impressionable mind sort of glomming onto the idea that obviously empires rise and fall, right? Good things come and good things go. And I was always aware that I was living in a really extra special situation in the United States of America, where you had tremendous freedom. I mean, when we were kids, you would hear people say, hey, butt out, man, it's a free country, right? You don't hear that so much anymore, which is a curious tell by itself. But I remember, even at a very young age, being very conscious that I was super lucky. I was very fortunate to be born into a place where I was living, and also that it wasn't going to continue. Now, again, but by the time I was, at full maturity and in my 20s, obviously, the unpleasant events of September 11th, 2001 had unfolded at some point along the way. And what we've seen is that really, quite frankly, events have borne me out in my view of what was coming. And so I started taking steps very early to put myself on a firm footing should the worst kind of outcomes play out. And we're obviously nowhere near a worst possible outcome, but there's a lot of things on the horizon, some of which we'll touch upon today, that make it kind of imperative that people who care about freedom, like your audience, that you make some kind of moves and some kind of effort. And I'm going to make this very simple for you because, quite frankly, like anything, right? As the old saying goes, the journey of 10,000 miles starts with the first single step. And so I got busy doing this, again, mostly by pure instinct. And I'll tell you how my journey began with a teaching job in Europe here in just a second. But I just put one foot in front of the other, and year after year, I found myself not just able to live with a lot less hassles and headaches that I see people struggling with, but also able to teach this to others. Right? It sort of came upon me that I knew enough about this that I could share it with others.
It's interesting. So you've been working with me. We're doing a little consulting about kind of some of the plans I need to put in place. And you're using this framework that you use with your high net worth clients, the wealth framework, which it's kind of interesting. It's just an acronym, but the wealth is really about freedom and autonomy that it comes through, right? That's what true wealth is having the options to do whatever you want. But there's an interesting, one of the things I want to talk about, and I thought of this because it's the L in your wealth stands for leave the herd behind, right? You got to leave the herd if you're going to be free in your life. But a lot of people object to like the framing that America's going down or that you should get a spot outside the United States. So I have all these things I've thought of. Like I don't want to be blackpilled because I'm not. I'm very optimistic about the future. But there's like a million different ways that the U.S. could tip into turmoil right now. And I know we were talking about some of these offline. You want to kind of cover like, maybe they're all low probability, but when they stack up, all these things seem to get so overwhelming that something's going to happen. Like, what are some of the tipping points you see coming?
I think it's a very good place for us to begin. I think the people are benumbed, aren't they? Right? I think a lot of people are actually a little bit like punch drunk from the events of the 2020s, to the point where any of these things at any other time in history would probably be a much bigger deal than they are. But the fact that there's an entire list of them, which I'm going to run through here, this is just something I know you put your 2 cents in and we just created sort of off the cuff. Obviously, 2023 had the second, third, and fourth largest banking crisis in the history of the U.S. Okay, more banking failures are coming. Okay, well, how's that going to be fixed? Well, what's likely to happen is a lot of people are going to lose money and they're going to print more money to cover depositors, right? So that there isn't like a massive French Revolution kind of uprising. So banking crisis, 34 trillion in debt. What does that even mean? A trillion seconds ago is 30,000 years ago. So there's $34 trillion of essentially excess spending that has piled up over the last 20, 40 years. Obviously, stocks are at the highest valuations in history. Most of the gains and most of the stock market is being held up by 7 big tech stocks. How long is that supposed to last? We don't know, right? What history says is things that go that far out of whack will come back into a sort of normal range at some point. Risk of hyperinflation. How much money is the government going to print to keep this whole game going, right? Like exactly where is the upper bound of that? Wealth confiscation. When the government gets bankrupt and desperate and people are restless, right? They tend to steal stuff. And why would that be out of the realm of possibility? Obviously, they can get their hands on a lot of people's 401ks and IRAs, massive tax audits. The IRS is openly admitting they're hiring 87,000 new agents and giving some of them guns and firearms training. Well, why are they doing that? What's that for? The IRS is only to take money from people inside the United States. Escalation of wars, obviously, this is very serious. This is much more serious than people realize. An all-out war with Russia is potentially the end of humanity. And what is NATO doing except poking Russia in the eye over and over again with their stupid policies? China, the Middle East, we're running around like a bully looking for somebody to take us down a peg.
Man, did you see Obama's last quote about the Houthis?
No, I did not.
He said, is the bombing working? No. Are we going to keep doing it? Yes.
Yeah,
exactly. You're like, oh, dude, that's American policy in one sentence.
That's very interesting. You said Obama, but of course Biden said that. But it's the same, right, isn't it? Political prosecutions or persecutions, if you will, obviously, whatever you think of Trump, the idea that the DOJ and the FBI have been weaponized against a candidate who's challenging to win the highest office is a very bad sign. This is what very seriously defunct kind of dysfunctional banana republics do. New pandemic lockdowns, this dopey WHO it wants to somehow take the sovereignty of all nations and tell people what they can and can't do. Possibility of climate change lockdowns, which is the biggest asinine scam ever, quite frankly. But they've sold a lot of, especially the younger population, on the idea that no, you have to stay within a 15-minute city while we fly in private jets, right, to go tell you what bugs you're going to eat for the next few years.
Well, and they've destroyed people's mental health with the climate change fear. Like they literally have taught people since they're, just starting like out their lives. These are kids, and you're telling them the world's going to end because of these bad people,
and you're bad. Right.
Exactly. They've got them brainwashed from a young age, so the anxiety levels are through the roof on some of these kids because they literally think the world's ending when it's not. It's not even close.
No, it's awful. And look, with respect to climate change, I'm not insensitive to the fact that it would be good if we stopped polluting so much. It would be good to stop throwing garbage in the oceans and just indiscriminately sort of, if you'll excuse me, shitting where we eat. This is not a good policy. Like, it is good for us to get but how is that going to happen by locking people in their cities and all the rest? Obviously, it's a recipe for violence. Political violence, trade wars, right? You see more and more of that, the old saying, right? When goods when goods stop crossing borders, soldiers start. The possibility of a cyber attack, energy crisis, terrorist attacks, AI displacing jobs. Like, what if, I know you quoted me this recently, trucking is the biggest single employment for most people in middle America. There's over 1 million truckers. Like, what happens if those trucks get automated by AI? Natural disasters, immigration crisis. I was in Mexico recently watching streams of people from all over the world just walk north toward the border. How long is that going to continue?
And that's a super important point, that it's not Mexicans. Like, Mexicans on net from Mexico to the U.S. and U.S. to Mexico, the immigration is going from U.S. to Mexico.
Net outflow. That's exactly right. Yep.
People are coming through Mexico from Africa, the Middle East, Asia, some Venezuela. There's Argentina. There's some people coming from like Latin America in general, but the majority of people, or a plurality maybe, are coming from not South America and Latin America.
Yeah. And listen, I mean, I wrote about this recently. I was in Guatemala at my place in the mountains there last year, year and a half ago, 2022, something like that. And I took a ride with a taxi driver who talked to me about what was happening in the U.S. with respect to the two very polarized sides, like sort of gunning up and getting ready to go at each other. And I asked him, I said, how is it that you know so much about what's going on in the U.S.? He said, because that's exactly how the Civil War happened in Guatemala. Now, most people don't know this, but from 1960 to 1996, there was massive genocide in Guatemala. This is ubiquitous 24/7 media. So it's not like everybody back then had a direct TV station that was covering all the people that were being slaughtered in Guatemala. This was a big, big deal. And the peace accords were signed very, very shortly before I got there in 1999. The accords were signed in 96. And so there was people alive who went through a lot of the Civil War down there. And he's this 70-plus-year-old gentleman driving a taxi is quoting me exactly how a Civil War starts. And he said, listen, I'm telling you exactly what's coming in the U.S. We've seen it. We already know where that leads. So, I mean, this is just a partial list. I'm sure you guys could come up with other items that are even more disturbing and more damning. But
wait, I'm really curious. What else did that Guatemalan guy say? Because like, what were the factors that he saw as the prerequisite to a civil war that parallels today?
Constant bickering and agitation of, like, one of the things that you see that's really, really troubling to me at any rate, and I think to anybody who's traveled and seen enough of the world, people say things publicly, and social media obviously has created a forum where all of this can take place. You see people intentionally saying the most inflammatory, most hurtful, most instigating kind of comments they can possibly come up with toward the other side. And, I'll get a gun and shoot you, and this kind of stuff. And it's like, well, how long before that boils over into, okay, I'm calling you bluff, do it. Or somebody, what typically happens, obviously, is that somebody says, okay, well, the danger of something bad happening to me is so great, I now need to act preemptively. That's when the war begins. We have a justification to go kill them before they kill us, right? And that's typically how these things go. The Guatemalan government extinguished and exterminated entire villages. They're still, in the last 20 years, they've still turned up bodies from places that were just bulldozed over, right? They killed everybody and buried them and tried to, make it all go away. But of course, it never does, right? And the kind of effect that has on a psyche of the people there was really something to behold.
I
So.
mean, people gloss over what a war looks like, and it's not pretty. Like, people laugh and joke about, oh, there's a civil war coming in the United States, or we're already in a civil war. And I mean, in some ways, I understand what they're talking about. Things are extremely tense. People are going a little crazy. But at the same time, your everyday life is very normal in the United States right now.
Yeah, things are
But
so good, right?
it could tip over. Like, there is no guarantee that this society we've built is going to last. In fact, we know, because we're an empire, it's almost destined to collapse at some point. Like, I don't know if the US could be the one empire that somehow survived. The odds are not, the historical narrative is not on our side for that to happen. Um, so when that does happen, maybe it's a year from now, maybe it's, 100 years from now. Who knows? The Roman Empire lasted forever, and they had multiple collapses. But a lot of people are kind of scared to go to Latin America because of the ideas of the things you said. Like, Guatemala had a civil war. El Salvador, a long time ago, not that long ago, had a civil war. Venezuela, Argentina, all these places have been chaotic on and off. So the idea that most Americans have about Latin America is like, yeah, I can't go there. It's too crazy. It's too violent. It's run by drug cartels. It's not safe like here in the United States. How do you address people when they like say stuff like that to you?
So most of my travel experience is in Latin America. I'm very fond of the region. I'll go into reasons why that's so, and some of the adventures that I've had there in the last 20 plus years. The reality of life in Latin America for somebody like you, like me, like our viewers, right? If you're in North America, you're automatically, most people don't do the math on this, but you're automatically in about the top, I don't know, 10, 15% wealthiest people in the world, just because your culture is so, like, we're so wealthy. If you have a house, or even if you're just living and working in North America, you're making the kind of money that makes you a very, very high income earner compared to the rest of the world. You're somewhere in the top 10 to 1% of wealthy people in the world. So where are you going when you end up in a place like Latin America? Are you going to a neighborhood where gangbangers are shooting each other in Mexico? You couldn't find these places if you tried, and you would certainly know that you were in the wrong part of town long before any trouble came along. So the reality of life in Latin America is, imagine yourself living the way people in, maybe it's not a completely fair parallel, because obviously there is a sort of relative and absolute quality to wealth, but like people in Aspen, Colorado, are not worried that they're going to get carjacked, right? That's not what's going on in Aspen, Colorado. If you're in Cabo, if you're in Recoleta, or various parts of Argentina and Buenos Aires and Bariloche in the mountains, or right, you're not running with the kind of crowd where people are going to actually, where crime is rampant and really bad things are going to happen. No, you're in the part that's the most protected, the most well-heeled, right? The wealthiest, the best off, the best schools, the best shopping, right? You're in the highest echelon of these societies pretty much by default. It would be hard for you to find really rundown parts of Guatemala City, or Lima, where I spent some time in Peru. No, you're going to be in the areas where 4 and 5 star resorts are located, and where people come because they have a certain level of wealth, and because those areas then are obviously the most protected. And so the reality of Latin America with respect to safety is very, very different than, you find me anybody who talks about how dangerous it is. And I'm not saying there's no danger. I'm saying that the danger is, like, if you went to Chicago, there would be parts of Chicago you would probably do well to stay out of, and you would know exactly how to do that. By instinct, you would know how to do that. In Latin America, it's no different. You're not going to find yourself, in a crossfire with, rival cartel members, shooting, like, that's all for the movies. It makes for a very good Netflix series, but it's not really how things go. I will tell you a story about bribing cops in Mexico here in a second, because the reality of crime and criminality in places like Latin America is, the people you have to fear are the officials, right? Now, in North America, we're starting to get a taste of what it feels like when officialdom actually is the criminal element. I mean, we are crossing a very bad threshold in the United States, in Canada too, for heaven's sake, with the confiscating of banks, where it's the people who are elected or even unelected, but running the institutions who are the criminals. It's these people you have to watch out for. And so you have to make that mental shift. You have to recognize that, yeah, you may have to bribe a cop if you're in Mexico. There's a right and a wrong way to do that, by the way. But the reality of safety in Latin America is very different than the myths and the sort of bullshit posts that you get from the U.S. State Department about, don't go to Dominican Republic because somebody's going to, slip a drug into your drink and then, you'll end up dead, right? This kind of thing. It's like, it's not that stuff never happens, but you got to be pretty damn dumb and you got to be pretty oblivious to put yourself in a situation where things like that can happen. That's the truth.
Yeah, there's a certain rule, and it's coming more to America too. It used to not be true in America, but it's more and more true now. Is just don't display your wealth too arrogantly in Latin America or in the United States anymore. There's rappers that posted their watches on Instagram and got shot for it in public because people know where they are. So it's just a general, security measure now is don't brag about your wealth with what you're wearing. You don't have to wear a $40,000 Rolex and, drive a Bugatti if you're in Mexico. You're asking for trouble. No matter where in the world you do that at this point. Just be a little humble, be a normal person.
And it's an interesting point. And I just piggyback on that. My son was born in Mexico in 2021, and we actually stayed in a town. I can tell him where it is, right? In North Yucatan, in Merida, which is a kind of no-go zone, right? All the cartels agreed that there will be no violence, no drug-related, gang-related violence in Merida. So it's very safe. The murder rate in Merida, I think, is about the same as Wisconsin, right, which is not exactly known as the murder capital of the U.S. And in Merida, just to give you an idea, it's not like you have to run around in fear for your life. There was a sushi restaurant below us where we stayed, very near to the hospital, for when a baby came, and a guy pulls up in a McLaren, $200,000 Mercedes. There was all kinds of very, very high-end, expensive cars. Like, what's going on here? I mean, this is ostensibly just a medium-sized city in Mexico. The level of wealth and the level of prosperity that is coming to these places, and I'll tell you the reason that this is happening, the level of wealth that's coming to certain parts of Latin America is shocking because, and most people, nobody I know talks about this. One guy that you and I both really admire, Henry, Bill Bonner, has written about this. The Industrial Revolution did not deliver its gifts to the whole planet the way it gave to Europe and the US. A lot of these places are experiencing the one-time boon, the one-time gift, the one-time big boom that happens when machinery and factories and sort of the industrializing of certain parts. You could see this in Panama. God, if I had only bought property in Panama City 2 decades ago, I mean, the place sprouted like a field of mushrooms. I mean, the skyline of Panama City is stunning. And they're still building high rises. They're still growing, right? The growth inside the country, I think the last I read, it's 6.2% GDP year over year growth in GDP. I mean, no developed country has that, right? That's normal for these places now because they're getting all the benefit of machinery and the mechanizing of supply chains and all these different things that we take for granted. It's booming. It's like the 1950s in some of these little towns in Latin America.
Yeah, it's amazing. I tell people don't understand that the United States is, when you're investing inside the United States, you're trying to go from like 95 to 100. But when you're investing in some of these rapidly developing Latin American countries, and I hear there's opportunities like this in Africa and Asia too. I just don't know the regions as well. But it really is like you have the opportunity to go from 10 to 100. Like their growth range is where we were in the 40s, 50s, 60s in America. The opportunities are just so much bigger and faster and more explosive in Latin America than they are in the United States. The only other thing I would say is Bitcoin is the only comparable investment that you could do right now that's going to have that kind of generational return.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I told you about my place. I bought property in Central America, in Highlands in Guatemala, in the year 2000. Basically sat on it, lived there on and off for 20 plus years, and I still go back there. We were back there last year, enjoyed ourselves enormously, and I'm up roughly 80 times my money in 23 years. Now, I challenge you to find any place where you're going to get you can make good money still in real estate in North America or various parts of Europe, I'm sure, but you're not going to make 80 times your money. You're not going to make that kind of gain, right? When these places, you go to a place in Latin America that they had no electricity 2 years before I arrived. Then they get electricity. Suddenly the roads are paved. Suddenly now everybody's got cell phones, and the cell towers jumped right over the creating of landlines, which is a tremendous infrastructure that has to be put in. They skipped it by putting up cell towers, so now everybody's connected. Now people got motorized vehicles, and machinery takes over for doing some of the stuff that the agriculture requires. And so the one-time jump in prosperity that happens, and if you find one of these places, you can end up very wealthy. That's an important message.
I just wrote about this in my weekly white pill that literally people are sleeping on how big of an impact Starlink will have, delivering high-speed internet instantly to every single underdeveloped part of the world. You're unlocking trillions and trillions of dollars in human potential that can get right online and start doing business with the rest of the world in American dollar terms or some others national currency terms. Like, you're not in some remote region in Africa dealing in, sticks and stones. All of a sudden, that person who happens to be talented but never had access to the world has access to the entire knowledge of the internet and all the commerce there. People don't understand how fast that skipping of having to hardwire the country is going to accelerate some of the profits in these places.
That's exactly right. Yeah, that's exactly right. I look for these places when I travel. It's like, what if this infrastructure project gets done here? I was just in Mexico checking out a place on the coast. Big infrastructure project coming there. I imagine fabulous fortunes are about to be made. They're actually trying to take a piece of the commerce from the Panama Canal, which is going, because Panama is going through a drought, right? There's real problems. There's real bottlenecks at the canal. So here's a ready-made solution. These kinds of things where huge prosperity. You and I talked about the big project that's going on in the Yucatan on that side of Mexico as well. They put a train in. There's a new international airport coming that takes a big burden off of Cancun, which is really, quite frankly, it's not overcrowded yet the way we think of overcrowding at a place like, LaGuardia or, some really major airport in the US, but it's crowded and it's annoyingly crowded. And all of that is going to change. So more and more wealth is going to be flowing in further south in Tulum, right? Identifying these areas right as they hit the knee of the curve, and then right where you see this really tremendous, almost vertical kind of development happens. That's where you want to be. That's where you want to be if you can. That's where you want to be invested. You spend some time there. You figure out exactly how you put your life together so you can really benefit from that. And there is no investment comparable to that in North America that I'm aware of. Certainly not in real estate and the kinds of things. And on top of it, you get a fabulous lifestyle and a whole lot of extra freedom by being an expat in one of these places as it starts to trend upward.
There's a place in Mexico that we've also talked about in the Yucatan called Izamal, and it's the Yellow City. It's an 18th century Catholic chapel / church, I don't know, cathedral almost, built on top of a Mayan ruin. The entire city was painted yellow for the arrival of the Pope some century and a half ago. There's still a pyramid in the middle of town. Now, it's designated one of Mexico's magical cities, and it's gorgeous, but it's kind of hard to get there for tourists. It's like an hour and a half drive from Merida, Merida's not the most convenient. There's an airport there, but it's not the most convenient place to get into. But the Tren Maya, the high-speed electric train, is having a stop now at Izamal, which makes it a 20-minute train ride from Cancun, 10 minutes from Merida. It's going to have this influx. And right now, you can buy property there. Very nice, acre lots for $10,000, $7,000. There's houses for $20,000.
Mexico is a bargain. Yeah, the Yucatan is a bargain, right? Anywhere you look, you can't believe actually how cheap it is. Yeah, that whole area.
And it's going to explode. That train is going to bring in so much money that town. I would really it seems natural to make that a Bitcoin economy because everything's painted gold. It looks happening like a Bitcoin city. So I'd anybody wants a Bitcoin project.
Get on that.
Start a circular economy in Izamal. I want to talk about some of your adventures that you've had. You referenced bribing the police in Mexico. So yes. What is the right and wrong way to bribe the police in Mexico?
First of all, this is for educational purposes only, okay? I had to transit Mexico multiple times